The morning sun filtered through the old oak trees, casting dappled shadows across my backyard as I approached my beehives. The familiar gentle humming grew louder with each step, a sound that had become my daily therapy over the past 3 years. I pulled on my protective hat and veil, not that I needed much protection anymore. My bees and I had developed an understanding, mutual respect built on routine and care. My journey into beekeeping began not by choice but by circumstance. When my grandparents passed away, leaving me their modest home on the edge of Oakwood Estates, I was at the lowest point of my life. Freshly unemployed after my company downsized, with a mounting pile of bills and dwindling savings, the inheritance was both a blessing and a reminder of loss. My grandfather had kept 2 small beehives at the far corner of the property, a hobby he maintained well into his 80s. Those first few weeks after moving in, I avoided the hives entirely. They sat abandoned, their gentle residents continuing their work without human intervention. It was not until I discovered one of my grandfather's beekeeping journals that curiosity drew me closer. His detailed notes, observations, and obvious passion sparked something inside me, a connection to him and a purpose I desperately needed. I still remember my first honey harvest, the golden liquid catching sunlight as it dripped into collection jars. The sense of accomplishment was intoxicating. That first small batch barely filled 6 jars, but I felt like I had struck gold. I gave most away to neighbors, who responded with such enthusiasm that I began to see potential beyond just a hobby. Over the years, my original 2 hives grew to 6 thriving colonies. Each painted in gentle blues and yellows, they formed a miniature village at the back of my property, partially hidden by flowering bushes I had planted specifically to provide additional forage for my bees. Every morning, I checked on them before heading to my part-time job at the local library, another position that came after the layoff, but never quite filled the professional void. My modest suburban neighborhood, Oakwood Estates, was generally quiet and pleasant, though the HOA had a reputation for strict enforcement of community guidelines. Fortunately, when I first moved in, the previous HOA president, a kindly retired botanist, had approved my grandfather's hives as educational environmental assets. I kept that approval letter safely filed away, though I rarely needed to reference it. Beekeeping became more than therapy. It became a small business. Every Saturday, I would set up a table at the local farmer's market, selling honey in recycled jars with hand-painted labels. Nothing fancy, just pure, raw honey with the natural flavors of whatever my bees had been foraging on that season. The extra income helped supplement my library salary, not enough to make me wealthy by any means, but enough to keep bill collectors at bay. My customers became regulars, many bringing back their empty jars for refills at a discount. I prided myself on sustainability and honesty, never heating the honey which would destroy its natural enzymes, never adding anything artificial. Just patience, care, and respect for the incredible creatures that produce this liquid gold. Some mornings, standing among my hives as thousands of workers departed on their daily missions, I would feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. After years of corporate stress and financial uncertainty, I had found peace in this unexpected place. If only I had known how quickly that peace would shatter when the house next door, vacant for almost a year, finally sold to its new owner. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday in early May, a massive vehicle that barely fit in the narrow driveway of the modest 2-story colonial next door. I watched from my kitchen window while sipping my morning tea sweetened with fresh honey. New neighbors always brought a mix of curiosity and apprehension in a close-knit community like ours. I decided to be proactive. That afternoon, I prepared a small welcome basket with homemade honey butter, a jar of my latest wildflower honey, and some freshly baked zucchini bread. The woman who answered the door was not what I expected. Perfectly styled blonde hair without a strand out of place, despite the chaos of moving day. Designer athletic wear that looked as if it had never seen a drop of sweat. A massive diamond ring that caught the sunlight so intensely I nearly squinted. Her smile was bright but calculated, not reaching her eyes as she glanced at my offering. "Well, is that not just so quaint?" she said, accepting the basket with two fingers as if it might contaminate her. "I am Deborah Wilson, just moved here from Lakeside Heights." I introduced myself, explaining I lived next door in my grandparents' old place. Her eyes narrowed slightly, giving me a quick up-and-down assessment. "That is the little blue house wit. All those wooden boxes in the backyard?" she asked, her tone shifting. I nodded, explaining they were beehives and offering a brief summary of my small honey business. Her smile tightened. "I see. Well, I am the new HOA board secretary. I will need to look into whether those are permitted. Livestock can be such a complicated issue in residential areas." Before I could explain that bees were not classified as livestock in our county, she thanked me curtly for the basket and closed the door. I stood on her porch for a moment, a sense of unease settling over me. That interaction set the tone for what became an increasingly uncomfortable relationship. Within days, Deborah, or Karen, as I began mentally referring to her, began her campaign of neighborhood improvement. It started with a ruler placed precisely against my front lawn, measuring grass height while I watched through my window in disbelief. The following week, I found a printed copy of HOA regulations in my mailbox, with sections about yard ornaments highlighted in neon yellow. My small collection of garden gnomes, inherited from my grandmother, had apparently become offensive. The irony was not lost on me that her own yard featured a massive cement fountain with cherubs spitting water, apparently exempt from the very rules she was enforcing. One morning while checking my hives, movement caught my attention. Karen stood at the edge of my property, phone in hand, photographing my beehives. I approached her, keeping my voice level despite my irritation. "Can I help you with something, Deborah?" I asked, deliberately using her proper name. She jumped slightly, then composed herself. "Just documenting code violations. These insect boxes are an eyesore and potentially dangerous to the community." I explained that I had proper approval from the previous HOA board, and that honeybees were docile unless threatened. I began explaining the critical environmental role bees played in pollination, hoping to educate her on their importance. Karen waved her hand dismissively, cutting me off mid-sentence. "Rules are rules, and I enforce them. The neighborhood has standards that need to be maintained. Some people may have gotten lax before I arrived, but that is changing." Her condescension ignited something inside me. My bees were not just a hobby or side business. They had saved me during my darkest time. I took a deep breath, trying to remain civil. "I have documentation approving the hives. They are perfectly legal both by HOA standards and county ordinance." Karen smirked, tapping something into her phone. "We will see about that. The board has the right to revoke previous approvals if they present a nuisance." She turned and walked back toward her house, her designer sneakers leaving perfect imprints in the soft grass. That evening, I found another notice taped to my front door citing unapproved landscape modifications, because the lavender I had planted for the bees extended 6 inches over the recommended border height. As I crumpled the paper in frustration, I had no idea that these petty citations were just the beginning of a neighborhood war, one that would soon escalate far beyond garden gnomes and lavender bushes. Something felt wrong. Despite the vibrant activity around my hives and the healthy brood patterns I observed during inspections, my honey production had dropped significantly over the past month. Where I should have been harvesting approximately 8 pounds of honey per hive, I was barely collecting 3. The math did not add up. My bees looked healthy, the queen was laying normally, and the surrounding wildflowers and gardens were in full bloom. Initially, I suspected natural causes. Perhaps a colony was preparing to swarm, or maybe local conditions had changed in ways invisible to me but significant to my bees. I increased my morning and evening checks, looking for signs of disease or parasites. Nothing seemed amiss except the mysteriously empty honeycomb where there should have been golden reserves. After 2 more weeks of diminishing returns, I considered the possibility of theft, not by humans, but by wildlife. Raccoons or bears were known to raid beehives, though I had never encountered such problems before. To confirm my suspicions, I purchased a small wildlife camera with night vision capabilities and mounted it on a nearby tree with a clear view of my hives. The next morning, I retrieved the memory card and brought it inside to review the footage. What I saw made my coffee mug slip from my fingers and shatter on the kitchen floor. The theft was indeed happening, but not by any woodland creature. At 5:43 a.m., the camera had captured a figure approaching my hives dressed in what appeared to be a cobbled-together beekeeper suit, white painter's coveralls, garden gloves, and a mosquito head net. Despite the disguise, there was no mistaking the careful gait and build of my neighbor, Deborah. I watched in stunned silence as He methodically opened one hive after another, removing frames heavy with honey and replacing them with empty ones she brought in a large backpack. Her technique was amateurish but effective. She worked quickly, nervously looking around every few seconds. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes before she retreated to her yard through a small gap in the fence I had not even noticed before. I replayed the video 3 times, each viewing amplifying my disbelief and anger. Over the next week, I documented 3 more early morning raids. By my calculations, Karen had stolen approximately 30 pounds of honey, retail value of nearly $600 at farmers' market prices. No wonder my production seemed low. She was systematically plundering my hives while simultaneously campaigning to have them removed from the neighborhood. I compiled the evidence meticulously, time-stamped videos, photographs, and detailed notes of each theft. Then, I confronted her. I caught her returning from her morning power walk and asked for a moment of her time. We stood on the sidewalk between our properties as I calmly explained what I had discovered and showed her a still image from the video on my phone. The transformation in her demeanor was immediate and remarkable. Her face flushed crimson before draining of all color. Then, as if a switch flipped, she became indignant, her voice rising to a pitch that attracted the attention of another neighbor walking their dog across the street. "How dare you accuse me of something so ridiculous?" Karen nearly shouted. "That could be anyone in that blurry picture. I should report you for harassment." I remained calm, informing her that I had multiple videos and would be filing a police report for theft. That was when her performance reached Oscar-worthy levels. "Go ahead," she sneered. "You think anyone will believe you? I am on the HOA board. I volunteer at the police department fundraisers. You are just a weird bee person who could not even keep a real job." The personal jab stung, but I maintained my composure and followed through on my promise. The next day, I visited the local police station to file a report. The officer who took my statement seemed sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. "This sounds like a civil matter," he explained, sliding my flash drive with the video evidence back across the desk. Neighbor disputes and HOA issues are not something we typically get involved with unless there is a direct threat or significant property damage. I tried explaining that this was straightforward theft, but apparently stolen honey did not rank high on their priority list. Similarly, my email to the HOA board was met with a form response about investigating the matter with no follow-up. The final insult came the following weekend. While visiting a farmer's market in a town 20 miles away, I stumbled upon an elegant booth with a hand-painted sign reading, "Deborah's Artisanal Honey, Pure, Local Luxury." Behind the table stood Karen in a crisp white apron, selling familiar golden jars for $25 each, triple what I charged for the exact same honey. I watched from behind a display of organic vegetables as customers gushed over her secret family recipe, honey, and special beekeeping techniques. My honey, harvested through my labor from my bees, was funding her luxury lifestyle while she actively worked to destroy my hives. As I clutched a jar of Deborah's special wildflower blend, identical to my own spring harvest, I realized this battle had escalated far beyond neighborly disagreements. This was my livelihood, my passion, my therapy being stolen jar by jar. My first attempt at securing justice was equally practical and naive. I installed small padlocks on each of my hives, believing this would at least halt the theft while I pursued other avenues. The locks were not impenetrable. No beekeeper would risk harming the colony with anything too substantial, but they required a key to open properly. I thought this would be enough to deter Karen from her early morning raids. I was wrong. Just 2 days later, I discovered 3 hives with broken hinges, the damage cleverly made to appear like weather-related wear. The locks remained intact, but the wood around them had been splintered, allowing the tops to be pried open without using the key. Whoever did it, and I had little doubt who, had even taken the time to roughly realign everything to appear normal from a distance. After documenting the damage with photographs, I repaired the hives and moved to Plan B. I sent detailed emails to each member of the HOA board individually, explaining the situation and attaching select video clips as evidence. I was careful to maintain a professional tone, focusing on the property theft rather than personal grievances. The responses trickled in over the next few days, each one a variation of the same unhelpful theme. We take all neighborhood concerns seriously and will add this to THE agenda for next month's meeting. One board member, whom I had never met, suggested that perhaps I should reconsider the appropriateness of keeping bees in a family community. While waiting for the board meeting, things escalated dramatically. Official-looking violation notices began appearing on my door with alarming frequency. First came warnings about unauthorized livestock on residential property, then citations for creating hazardous conditions attractive to dangerous insects. Finally, a notice of fines totaling $750 for continued violation of community standards after multiple warnings. Each notice was signed by Deborah Wilson in her capacity as HOA secretary. Each one referenced bylaws that, when I researched them, were either misquoted or misapplied to my situation. I spent sleepless nights at my kitchen table, surrounded by printed county ordinances and state agricultural guidelines that specifically protected beekeepers from exactly this type of harassment. The Agricultural Protection Act of our state clearly stated that beekeeping was classified as agricultural activity, not livestock management, and that HOAs could not prohibit properly maintained apiaries. I highlighted relevant sections, printed copies of my original approval, and compiled a folder of documentation proving my compliance with all safety standards. Armed with this information, I arrived at the monthly HOA meeting held in our community center. 20 neighbors sat in folding chairs facing the board table where Karen sat beside 4 other board members, her expression smug as I signed in to speak during the public comment period. When my turn came, I approached the podium with my carefully organized materials. Before I could finish my opening statement about the legitimate approval of my hives, Karen interrupted. "If I may," she said, standing dramatically, "I think the board should be aware that just last week I was attacked by the very bees we are discussing." She rolled up her sleeve to reveal an angry red welt on her forearm. "This happened while I was simply gardening in my own yard. These are not safe domestic bees but aggressive insects that pose a danger to everyone, especially children and pets." The board president, a tall, stern man I later learned was Karen's brother-in-law, thanked her for bringing this safety issue to light, and then turned to me. "You have 30 seconds remaining to address the board," he said coldly. My carefully prepared presentation crumbled under the time constraint and hostile atmosphere. I managed only to distribute my documentation before being cut off mid-sentence by the timer. The board voted 4-1 to review the beekeeping situation with neighborhood safety as the primary concern, before moving on to the next agenda item as if the matter were settled. Walking home in the evening darkness, I felt defeated. The legal routes I had trusted in seemed blocked at every turn. As I approached my driveway, Mrs. Peterson, an elderly neighbor who had lived in Oakwood Estates for over 30 years, called softly from her porch. "Do not let her win, dear," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She did the same thing to the Johnson family who used to live in your house, claimed their koi pond was a drowning hazard until they filled it in. Then their vegetable garden violated some height restriction. They finally gave up and moved. She does this every time, targets someone until they leave, then moves on to the next." Her words stopped me cold. This was not about bees or honey or even money. This was about control and territory. Karen had selected me as her next victim in a pattern that had apparently been ongoing for years. As I thanked Mrs. Peterson and continued home, something shifted inside me. The frustration and helplessness crystallized into determination. If traditional channels of justice were closed to me, perhaps it was time to seek justice of a different kind, the sweet, poetic variety that Karen herself had unwittingly taught me was possible. Revenge, like honey, requires patience. The best honey comes from careful cultivation, proper timing, and understanding the intricate behavior of bees. My plan would follow the same principles: methodical preparation, precise timing, and leveraging what I knew about both bees and my target. First, I needed to understand Karen's routine. For 2 weeks, I became a student of her habits, noting her comings and goings with the dedication of a naturalist observing a new species. Her life ran with predictable precision: 7 a.m. power walks around the neighborhood perimeter, Tuesday evening tennis lessons at the country club, Thursday afternoon salon appointments that transformed her hair from simply perfect to absolutely flawless. Sunday mornings featured church attendance, followed by brunch, with what appeared to be a rotating group of equally polished women. Most importantly, I confirmed that Saturday evenings were dedicated to her. Wine club meeting, which typically ended with her returning home slightly unsteady around 11 p.m. and sleeping soundly until at least 9 a.m. Sunday mornings, her only day to sleep in, as she had once loudly complained to another neighbor within my hearing. While documenting her schedule, I reached out to my friend Miguel, a professional beekeeper who specialized in hive relocation for commercial properties. Over coffee at a cafe 20 miles from our neighborhood, far from prying eyes, I explained my situation, careful to frame it as a hypothetical problem. So hypothetically, Miguel said with a knowing smile, you want to know if bees can be temporarily relocated in a way that is safe for the bees but might create a situation that is uncomfortable for someone who deserves it. I nodded, grateful for his understanding without requiring explicit details. Miguel explained the concept of observation hives, special enclosures with glass panels designed for educational displays. Unlike regular hives, these contained only a fraction of a full colony but were completely secure, allowing bees to enter and exit through a controlled tube while remaining safely behind glass. He sketched one on a napkin, explaining how they were frequently used in schools and museums without incident. Hypothetically, he continued, if someone placed an observation hive somewhere visible, filled it with frames of honey and brood from established hives, and positioned the entrance tube correctly, it would attract hundreds of forager bees from the area. They would be drawn to the familiar scent of their own honey and the queen pheromones. The next day, I drove 2 hours to an agricultural supply warehouse and purchased a beautiful cedar observation hive with tempered glass panels. The salesperson was delighted to help, assuming I was creating an educational display for a school or community garden. I did nothing to correct this impression, as she added bee-friendly educational materials to my purchase. The legal aspects required careful consideration. I spent late nights researching county regulations, property laws, and HOA bylaws. There was a clear distinction between permanent apiaries, which required certain setbacks from property lines, and temporary educational displays, which fell under different guidelines. I constructed my plan to stay firmly within legal boundaries while creatively interpreting certain gray areas. My research revealed another crucial detail. Our county agricultural department actively encouraged community pollinator education and even provided official-looking materials for such programs. I downloaded their templates, modified them slightly, and created professional documents complete with legitimate contact information for the County Agricultural Extension Office. Next came the honey testing. Different honey varieties produce different scent profiles, and bees respond more strongly to certain types. Through careful experimentation, I confirmed what Miguel had suggested. Wildflower honey created the strongest response from forager bees, drawing them from impressive distances. I prepared frames with this specific honey, knowing they would act as powerful attractants. The most critical preparation involved my own security. I installed additional cameras around my property, both visible and hidden, to document everything that might unfold. If Karen escalated to property damage or false accusations, I wanted irrefutable evidence of my actions and hers. Each camera was positioned to capture different angles, with overlapping coverage to prevent blind spots. As my plan took shape, a strange calm settled over me. The frantic anxiety that had plagued me for weeks transformed into focused determination. I was not acting out of mere petty revenge, but reclaiming my peace of mind and livelihood. If Karen wanted to be intimately involved with my bees and honey, I would grant her wish in a way she never anticipated. The final component fell into place when I discovered that Sunday, May 15th, would feature the annual garden tour for Karen's church group. According to the neighborhood newsletter she had begun publishing, she would be hosting the post-tour refreshments at her home at 11 a.m., meaning her perfectly manicured front yard and porch would need to be immaculate for the gathering of her social peers. On my calendar, I circled the date with red ink. Beneath it, I wrote 2 words, Sweet Justice. As I closed the planner, I glanced out my window toward the hives where thousands of bees returned from their daily foraging. They moved with purpose and coordination, each one playing a small role in a grander design. Soon, they would help me execute a plan just as intricate and purposeful. I selected the specific frames to transfer to the observation hive, those richest in honey and most attractive to forager bees. I prepared the educational placards explaining bee behavior and environmental benefits. I practiced pose, positioning the hive for maximum visibility while ensuring it remained technically on public property. Every detail was considered, every contingency planned for. The night before Operation Hive relocation, I sat in my garden watching the sunset paint my beehives gold. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely at peace. Tomorrow would bring consequences, for Karen, certainly, but perhaps for me as well. Yet something told me that justice, like the perfect honey harvest, would be worth the wait. Sunday morning arrived with perfect clarity, not a cloud in the sky, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring blossoms. My alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., though I had barely slept, my mind cycling through the details of my plan. I silenced the alarm and lay still for a moment, considering one final time whether to proceed. The memory of Karen's smug face selling my honey under her label provided the resolve I needed. I dressed in dark clothes, not for stealth but practicality. Early morning dew would show on lighter fabrics. In my garage, the observation hive waited, already prepared with selected frames rich with honey and containing a small cluster of worker bees, enough to maintain the hive but not the full colony that would arrive once the scent established itself. The observation hive was truly a beautiful object, crafted from polished cedar with crystal-clear glass panels on both sides, secured with brass fixtures. It looked more like fine furniture than beekeeping equipment. Educational by design, it allowed viewers to safely observe bee behavior through glass, while the insects accessed the outside through a small tube. At precisely 5:00 a.m. I began. The neighborhood lay in perfect silence as I wheeled my garden cart containing the hive and materials to the edge of my property. In the dim pre-dawn light, I reviewed my schematic once more. The critical legal detail was placement. The hive needed to sit within the public easement area, the strip of land between sidewalk and street technically owned by the municipality, not on Karen's private property. The perfect spot presented itself beside her porch steps, fully within the public easement, yet immediately adjacent to her property. I positioned the observation hive on its stand, making minute adjustments to ensure stability and visibility. The extraction tube, the passage through which bees would enter and exit, faced away from the walkway, providing safe distance for any pedestrians. Next came the educational materials. I placed professionally printed placards around the display. Save the Bees, Community Pollinator Education Project, and sponsored by County Agricultural Extension Office. Each sign contained factually accurate information about bee conservation and environmental benefits. I positioned laminated documents in a weatherproof sleeve containing the details of the imaginary community program, complete with official-looking letterhead and contact information that would route to the actual county agricultural office. By 5:45 a.m., everything was in position. The small cluster of bees inside the observation hive had already begun orienting themselves, their activity visible through the glass as they explored their temporary home. I made one final adjustment to ensure everything was perfectly visible to both Karen's doorbell camera and my long-range camera hidden in a tree across the street. Back in my home, I settled at my desk where 3 monitors displayed different camera angles, one showing Karen's front door, another focused on the observation hive itself, and a third providing a wider view of the street. Now came the waiting game. I prepared coffee and a light breakfast, knowing it might be hours before the first act of my carefully choreographed performance began. The waiting proved shorter than anticipated. By 7:30 a.m., the first forager bees from my backyard hives had discovered the observation hive. The scout bees, drawn by the familiar honey scent and queen pheromones, performed their waggle dances upon returning home, directing more workers to the location. By 8:15 a.m., a steady stream of bees flowed between my backyard apiary and the observation hive, creating a visible bee highway through the neighborhood. By 9:00 a.m., hundreds of bees buzzed around the front of Karen's house, though they remained focused on the observation hive rather than showing any interest in her property itself. The glass-enclosed structure functioned exactly as designed, allowing bees to enter and exit safely while preventing any access to the inner workings by curious humans. From a distance, however, the concentration of flying insects created an impressive and somewhat intimidating display. At precisely 9:37 a.m., Karen's front door swung open. My heart raced as I watched all three camera feeds simultaneously. She stepped onto her porch in a silk robe, reaching for the Sunday paper that lay on her welcome mat. For 3 glorious seconds, she did not notice anything amiss. Then her eyes tracked upward, registering the unusual activity in her front yard. What followed was a sequence I have replayed countless times since. Karen froze mid-reach, the newspaper forgotten. Her face transformed from sleepy disinterest to confusion, then recognition, and finally pure, unfiltered horror. Her mouth opened in what my cameras recorded as a piercing scream, though my microphones barely captured it. She backpedaled so quickly she stumbled against her front door, fumbling with the handle before disappearing inside. Through her front window, I could see her frantically dialing her phone, gesticulating wildly as she paced back and forth. Within 20 minutes, the quiet Sunday morning transformed into a scene of suburban chaos. 2 police cruisers arrived with lights flashing, followed shortly by an animal control van. Officers approached the observation hive cautiously, maintaining their distance from the cloud of bees that continued their peaceful commute between their original home and this new outpost. I watched a while longer, allowing the authorities time to assess the situation before I made my entrance. This was, after all, a performance that required precise timing. I changed into a respectable button-down shirt and khakis, collected my binder of documentation, and prepared to join the scene I had orchestrated. As I locked my front door behind me, I felt strangely calm. The bees had played their part perfectly. Now it was my turn. The scene that greeted me as I walked down my driveway was something from a neighborhood disaster movie. 3 police cruisers with flashing lights lined the street. An animal control van was parked at an angle, its back doors open as 2 officers in protective gear consulted clipboards. Most surprisingly, the county agricultural inspector's truck had arrived, a development I had hoped for but not counted on with certainty. Neighbors stood in clusters on their lawns, pointing and murmuring as they watched the activity from a safe distance. At the center of it all stood my observation hive, surrounded by a cloud of industrious honeybees going about their business, creating a mesmerizing visual barrier that kept everyone at a respectful distance. Karen stood on her porch, now fully dressed in what appeared to be church clothes, gesticulating wildly as she spoke to a police officer. Her face was flushed red, visible even from where I stood. When she spotted me approaching, she pointed dramatically, her voice carrying across the lawn. "That is him. That is the one responsible for this attack. He did this deliberately." I approached calmly, carrying my binder of documentation. The senior police officer turned to me with a weary expression. "Sir, can you explain what is going on here?" he asked, notepad ready. "Of course," I replied. "This is part of the Community Pollinator Education Project. I am a registered beekeeper participating in the county conservation program." I opened my binder, producing the necessary documents: my beekeeping registration, county permits, and the perfectly legal educational display guidelines that allowed temporary observation, hives on public easements. The officer reviewed them with a furrowed brow while Karen fumed beside him. "This is not education. This is harassment," she shouted. "He put dangerous insects on my property deliberately." The agricultural inspector, a middle-aged woman with sun-weathered skin and practical clothing, approached the observation hive for a closer look. She studied it professionally, then examined the educational placards. "This is actually a proper observation hive," she noted. "Completely sealed, proper ventilation, secure entry tube." She turned to me. "May I see your registration number?" I provided it, watching as she inspected the frames visible through the glass. Her expression changed suddenly as she leaned closer. "These frames have identification markings," she said, pointing to tiny numbers I had engraved on the wooden frames. "They belong to a registered apiary." She looked up at me. "Your apiary, I presume?" Before I could answer, Karen interjected with unexpected vehemence. "Those are MYBs. I have been keeping them for years." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "You are a registered beekeeper as well, ma'am." Karen faltered momentarily before doubling down. "Of course I am. I sell honey at the Westview Farmers Market every weekend." "Interesting," the inspector said coolly. "Could I see your beekeeper registration number, please?" Karen blinked rapidly. "I do not have it memorized. It is inside." "Perhaps you could show me your equipment then. Proper protective gear is required for registration." In her flustered state, Karen made a critical error. "I just use a painter's suit and gloves. It works fine when I collect the honey frames early in the morning before the bees are active." A heavy silence fell over the group. The police officer looked up from his notepad, suddenly more interested. "Early in the morning?" he asked. "From which hives exactly?" Karen realized her mistake too late. Her face drained of color as I calmly removed a USB drive from my binder. "I have video documentation of Ms. Wilson trespassing on my property and stealing honey frames from my registered hives on multiple occasions," I stated. "The most recent incident was Thursday morning,